Hello and welcome to World Talks. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. Let's focus on the talks in Saudi Arabia. Tuesday will mark yet another historic date in the 3 years war of existence for Ukraine. America and Ukrainian delegations are due to meet in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The American side says the goal is to create a framework for peace agreement and an initial ceasefire. Yet on the Ukrainian side, amid the hope, there are fears of meeting that could be a delaying tactic or an attempt by Mr. Trump to win concessions that benefit Russia. What could be the outcome of these talks? Are we heading for another confrontation? To delve on these questions, now I'm joined by Ashton Cirillo, former Sergeant Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. Good evening, good to have you.
Good evening, Anna, and I want to just give a quick shout out to the people of Poland for standing firm for freedom, and particularly to the brave foreign minister of Poland, Minister Sikorski, who isn't afraid to speak about facts during a time of fake news. So Poland, thank you for standing with us always, and thank you for being represented by such strong leaders during a time of crisis.
Very grateful for these words. Thank you so much. So let's now turn to the peace talks in Saudi Arabia. That those peace talks take place with rather clear starting points expressed by both sides. So how brutal you think those talks can be?
Well, one of the bigger issues is this talk of a supposed temporary ceasefire. And we saw President Zelensky telegraph what he was thinking about in regards to this last week when he talked about a ceasefire in the areas of naval and air space, long-range strikes, things of that magnitude. And with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian side showing their willingness to advance ceasefire talks, I think that is going to play a very strong role in getting the Americans to listen to other aspects of the Ukrainian side's concerns and notion of what a just peace really looks like.
All right, but in the meantime, drones and missile strikes are hammering Ukrainian cities, putting even more pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky. So what is this situation currently on the battlefield, and what has been the impact of the suspended Starlink surveillance on the situation in the Kursk region?
Well, we can look at two different areas. We have a story being told in Kursk, and we have the story being told in the Eastern Front. And to speak from the Eastern Front, which the mainstream media and a lot of pundits are ignoring, Ukrainian defense forces have taken the initiative or retaken the initiative all along that Eastern Front line, including the cities of Toretsk and Pokrovsk, moving north into the Kursk salient around Sudzha. Despite what we're hearing about Ukrainian soldiers being encircled, the command and leadership are doing everything they can to remind the Russians that there is a reason that the Ukrainian Defense Forces have controlled a part of Kursk now for almost a year, coming up on 10 months. And clearly, there's an issue with the satellite imaging and basically making Ukrainian Defense Forces blind in that area. However, and this is one of the key ideas to understand, due to the magnitude of drones that are flying in the skies along the Kursk front and the Eastern Front, while we don't have the amazing imagery that has been provided by the United States, we do have a sense of when the Russians are coming and going, which is one of the reasons we were able to understand that they were trying to come in through the gas pipes, and that mission failed completely for the Kremlin.
We're just watching the pictures from Saudi Arabia as we speak. We see Volodymyr Zelensky arriving to Riyadh. At the very same time, Marco Rubio landed in Jeddah for tomorrow's meetings. But let's just focus for a second on the objectives of Ukraine. So what are the minimum objectives for Kiev in your mind? And what are the red lines for Ukraine?
Well, let's start with the red lines. The red lines are going to be anything that basically allows Ukraine to be sold out to Russian interests. President Zelensky has discussed in the past that sometimes territorial issues will be discussed through diplomacy. So it's not a question of how the country is returned to its 2014 borders. It's more of a question of making certain that Ukraine's allies do not allow this idea of returning to its 2014 borders to be sold out from underneath the Ukrainians. So that's the red line. Regarding what we can look at moving forward, President Zelensky, Chief of Staff Yermak, and others have been clear that they want a just peace. What is a just peace? A just peace is something that will show the world that Ukraine's 3+ year battle against a full-scale invasion and 10+ years against this Russian war machine was not in vain. That could represent Russia having to go ahead and give up their territorial gains. It could represent large investments by partners in the European Union and around the world. And it's just a question of how strong will the United States stand by Ukraine in order to not give anything away to the Russian Federation.
Exactly, and so far we don't see much of those just peace signs, right? So what terms will the American negotiators bring to Saudi Arabia?
One of the things I've said on your show before, and I was eternally optimistic until about 10 days ago, was that we can not have to pay attention to President Trump's words. We should see what the outcomes are. And thus far, the one they'll hold on to is that nothing has been thoroughly given to the Russians yet. And so coming out of the talks in Jeddah, we hope to see that the United States understands that they cannot continuously press the Ukrainian side for, quote, concessions while refusing to even engage the Russians on issues regarding the war. And the one piece of news that came out of yesterday from President Trump is that he's willing to look at very severe sanctions against the Russian Federation. That has to be a minimal starting point to bring these people to the table. The people of Poland, the people of the European Union, and all those who stand with Ukraine understand that Russia will never stop attempting to conquer Ukraine, conquer the Baltic states, and even potentially try to conquer Poland. And so if we're not even willing on the U.S. side to look at, quote, these severe sanctions, then we are playing into the Russians' hands, and we can't allow that to happen.
I fully agree. So the U.S. talks of peace, the Ukrainians talk of peace, but the only ones not mentioning peace at all are the Russians. So what does Russia want? And so far, Vladimir Putin hasn't stepped back a foot from its initial standpoint. And now we hear Donald Trump saying that U.S. also has its weaknesses. So isn't it like giving everything that Russia could possibly expect, meaning that we acknowledge our weaknesses?
When the United States has to reappraise its standing in the world, it's a very sad time. I believe that the United States is still the world's lone superpower, as do many across the world. And with that reality, we also understand that the Russians are genocidal imperialists who rape and pillage everywhere they go. And as such, they will never give an inch, because if they did, it would force them to reflect on the fact that their carnage is not only in violation of international norms, their carnage harkens back to the Middle Ages. And that's why they're never going to give up, and why Ukraine truly is this front line of freedom against these pillaging criminals.
So coming back to this negotiation table, how much can be given to Russia, do you think?
It's going to be the question of how far does Russia push back on what is even attempted to be discussed with them? Because you just said it very clearly. Russia is not stepping back at all. Russia can't step back, not only due to the fact that they would have to acknowledge some guilt, which is outside of Russia's collective conscience, but their economy is tied into this war machine. If they were to step back, we would see internal distress inside of Russia that the Russian Federation, led by Putin and his gangsters, just cannot allow to happen. And so what my prediction is that no matter what the United States offers them, if anything at all, it won't be enough for the Russians. And this is why we see today in the Middle Eastern waters, Iran, China, and Russia doing their Security 25 naval drills, because Russia has no intention to separate themselves from the Chinese. Russia has no intention to separate themselves from the Iranians. Russia's a terrorist state that needs its terrorist allies.
So what if the talks fail? In what position will Ukraine be in this moment?
The Ukrainian people will continue to stand for their belief in their nation and their belief in why this fight is a just one. The question, if these talks fail with the United States, is how do the 30-plus nations that are gathering tomorrow in France from the European heads of different militaries and delegations, how do they come together to support Ukraine during this vacuum or this potential vacuum that the United States would be leaving? And if the European Union continues to step up in a way that will provide funding and weapons and mutual agreements between Ukraine and the different European Union nations, then we will see Ukraine continue to fight in a way and manner that can lead it to victory. If the Europeans are unable to come to agreements with Ukrainians, then we're going to see a very rough and dark time.
And very briefly, just to wrap up, what role exactly did Saudis play in the whole process?
The Saudis have a long history with the Zelensky administration, dating back to working on different areas of financial intelligence, is a way for me to put it, even before they signed official agreements. So Saudi Arabia is a nation that, because of its oil and petrol interests, because of its history with the Ukrainians, of course, very close relationship between the Saudi government and the U.S., and the oil interests of Saudi and Russia, they are an arbiter that can be looked at potentially as fair and definitely as someplace that is neutral ground, if not, in fact, somewhat in favor of Ukraine's position.
Surgeon, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Anna.
So, Ashton Cirillo, former Surgeon of Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, was our guest here in World Talks. Thank you very much for watching and for being with us. And stay tuned to TVP World for more news and coverage.